Well, if I may, let me call our evening to order, and once again welcome you on behalf of Economists for Peace and Security, myself, and the rest of the board, to this dinner, which is the umpteenth dinner. I've forgotten how many. 16th, 17th? Taya, do you have a count? All right. And that we have held in the course of these meetings. And this is really quite a special occasion for us because I think it is the first time that we have honored one of the leadership team of EPS. One of the, I mean, we've honored, of course, Ken Arrow and Larry Klein and our founders, but I'm talking about the people who have been forming the part of the inner core, the people who came in to help guide this organization at the same time I did. And I'm truly thrilled tonight that we're able to gather here to honor Mike Intriligator. I will say just a word about what Mike's role has meant to me. I didn't know him, except perhaps an occasional greeting, before I was recruited to serve as the chair of EPS. And at one of the very first board meetings that I attended, it became clear to me that Mike's interest in the activities of this organization was truly intense. It was something that mattered a great deal to him. And so it seemed to me that I should reach out to him and ask him if he would be one of the vice chairs, the other one being my very longstanding colleague and collaborator on Capitol Hill and afterwards Richard Kaufman. And Mike agreed to do that. And it was exceptionally important to the organization that it should have in its core leadership someone who has Mike's record of distinguished contributions to the economics profession, his expertise in national security issues going back many years, and his commitment and energy in the cause that EPS represents. And I discovered early on that this was truly and is truly a force of nature, that Mike Intriligator was the guy who would fly from Los Angeles to New York to come to our board meetings, who would be willing to go practically anywhere in the world, to Moscow or to practically any place, Tokyo, any place else where we had an affiliate who was active and operating and who would be both warmly received, highly respected there, and carry with him the entire force of his personality and his authority on behalf of this organization. He was and is a person who does this with whole heart and a deep commitment to the cause that we represent, which is, and always has been, I think, under the guidance of Bob Solow, who said this many times, economists stick to your last, that we should be bringing the authority and the voice that professional economists can bring to the cause of conflict resolution, the stabilization of these issues, which are vital to the success of economic development around the world, in advanced countries and developing countries alike. So I have a deep debt of gratitude to Mike. I don't think that my tenure as chair could have been successful without the friendship and energy and support that he brought to me. And it was not just that, it was that at a personal level, I always had Mike's encouragement and support, And at various times when I said, look, I think I've done this for enough, he would say, no, you're doing okay, keep it up. And I would feel that I had an obligation to him to do so, in part because he was also willing to continue his commitment. Now, Mike has had a pretty rough year, as I think all of us know. He's not here tonight. We are exceptionally hopeful that the next year will be better, that he'll get over the complex array of ills that have been afflicting him, and that he will be back in our ranks. But since this meeting was on the West Coast, we made a decision a year ago, in advance of many things that have happened since, that we would use this occasion to honor Mike Intriligator, and I'm very happy that we have stuck to that plan. What we will do this evening is have a short sequence of tributes from some of Mike's closest friends and collaborators and people who've worked with him on a whole range of issues over the years. And then Ken Arrow has very kindly agreed to say a few words in response on behalf of Mike himself. I have the pleasure here of beginning the occasion by conveying to you the remarks of three very distinguished people who wanted to be heard tonight and who were not able to be here. And the first one is James Heckman. And let me read what each of them has to say. This is, again, James Heckman. I regret that I am unable to attend the dinner sponsored by Economists for Peace and Security honoring Mike Intriligator. He is an old friend and a highly respected economist. While I am unfamiliar with his leadership activities at EPS, I can write about the range and depth of his contributions to technical economics and his public service to the profession. Mike has written influential papers in several areas of economics. He started out as a Cold Warrior with close ties to the military establishment. His work in the past 20 to 25 years has shifted to investigating mechanisms for ensuring peace and establishing international security. He brings technical power to these investigations, as well as deep concern over the human dimension of these issues. His work on strategy and arms control has had a substantial impact on research in the area. He has written influential work on strategies to win missile wars, his early work on controlling nuclear proliferation, and on policies to promote national security and reduce international tensions. He has also written important studies of the Russian economy, recognized by his election to the Russian Academy of Sciences. Given that Russia once was, and may still become again, our mortal enemy, his depth of knowledge of Russian society has served all of us in good stead in discussing frameworks for international peace and cooperation. Mike has also made influential contributions to healthcare, medical statistics, and sampling and extrapolation issues that arise in medical economics and in more general settings. This work is part of his general contribution to the teaching and development of econometric methods, as exemplified by his widely used textbook and his numerous contributions to the handbooks of econometrics. Mike has also made important contributions to mathematical economics. His research in mathematical economics and econometrics has been recognized by his election to fellowship in the Econometric Society, a major honor. Mike has also rendered extraordinary professional service through his co-editorship with Ken Arrow of a diverse array of handbooks in economic theory, econometrics, labor economics, finance, macroeconomics, environmental economics, and many other topics. These handbooks set the standards for the profession in their respective fields. For many years, Mike has also conducted the influential Marshak Colloquia at UCLA, which fosters interdisciplinary research in the tradition of Jacob Marshak. These are but a small fragment of his many contributions to professional economics and to enlarging the boundaries of our field. I am delighted that Economists for Peace and Security is honoring him today for what is just the tip of a large iceberg of professional contributions and service. I think that's a very just excellent tribute. It covers a great deal of ground, and it says a great deal about Mike that Jim Heckman would write that for us on very short notice as just a tribute to the professional esteem in which Mike is held. I have here also two other slightly shorter communications. This one is from Sir Richard Jolly, Honorary Professor, Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, and a longstanding member and a trustee of Economists for Peace and Security. And Richard writes, "My friendship with Mike goes back a long way, to Yale Graduate School in 1959, when we sat together in the class of Professor William Fellner. Fellner, like James Tobin, taught basic economic theory in the Socratic manner, presenting economic propositions in a questioning mode, which with each proposition followed by a pause for reflection or question. For Mike, almost every class was the occasion for a penetrating question, if not several. So he rapidly acquired the nickname Mike Interrogator. Mike left Yale after the first year, back to MIT, where he found the range and rigor more to his liking. And his most distinguished career rapidly took off. Our paths went separate ways, but came together a few years ago in the EPS. I have been pleased that our early friendship has been revived with mutual outrage about the unnecessary costs and wastes of excessive military spending and the instabilities and inequalities that it generates. I am sorry that I cannot be with you this evening, but it's with enormous pleasure that I add my few words of praise to Mike, to all he has accomplished in economics, and to his steadfast commitment to the values and activities of Economists for Peace and Security." That's from Sir Richard Jolly. Then I have one which really has a great deal of resonance and importance to me, and I think it will also to Mike, who will receive in due course the videotape of these events. So we're, in effect, sending him a really massive get well card here. That's the idea of this dinner, frankly, is just to tell Mike, you know, we need you back here, so you really should do your best to get well soon. But this one is from Alexander Nekipelov, Sasha Nekipelov. And Sasha is a figure of really great importance to Mike and to myself. He is the vice president of the Russian Academy of Sciences, the highest ranking economist in the Academy of Sciences. A very modest and quiet, soft-spoken person, as I think all who know him will attest, and someone who has faced and analyzed the events in his home country with a great deal of calm and dispassion over many years. So someone who we both value very highly. He writes, "Dear Jamie, I have been trying to find a chance to attend the meeting organized by yourself in honor of Mike. Unfortunately, it turned out to be impossible. It is really a pity for me. May I ask you to mention in your speech how much we appreciate Mike, both as a worldwide known economist and political scientist, and as an outstanding person who has greatly contributed to the development of cooperation between American and Russian scholars. We in Russia remember his active and very important intellectual involvement in economic and political reforms in our country, especially as a member of the Russian-American Economic Transition Group. He played an extremely important role in the formation of the Moscow School of Economics, coming to us and giving our students his unforgettable lectures. As far as I am concerned, I have very special reasons for admiring Mike's personal qualities. Such a support, which both of you extended to me, I will never forget. We all wish Mike fast and full recovery and hope very much to see him soon in Moscow. Very best regards, Sasha. So I will close my remarks and my part of this program by just adding my endorsement to what Sasha just said. We all have very special reasons for admiring Mike's personal qualities. His energy, his intelligence, his commitment, his capacity to bring people together in a common endeavor, and the enormous range of experience and depth and professional accomplishment that lies behind that capacity. All of that means a great deal to us all, and we're certainly, Mike, looking forward to having you back amongst us at the earliest possible date. I will now turn the floor over to, again, one of my oldest and closest friends, Richard Kaufman, who has also collaborated with Mike at great length, and I will leave Richard to direct the order of presentations following. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for those remarks about Mike, about which I can only add a very brief footnote, as it were. Mike has been an EPS colleague of mine for many years. I know him to be an incisive thinker, a hard worker, dedicated to the purposes of EPS, namely peace and security. And his vision goes beyond the common understanding of that phrase. He has shown us that peace cannot be achieved by any single nation, including the United States, acting alone, and that security also needs to be approached from a multilateral perspective. That international cooperation is required to assure, in Mike's words, the vital interests of the planet. And as Jamie indicated, his views went beyond the usual boundaries that most of us work within. And not only the planet, but including the threats which he enumerated in one of his more recent papers as war, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, pandemic diseases, climate change, natural disorders, and poverty and malnutrition. In his prolific writings, in his participation in conferences, here, there, and practically everywhere, as Jamie indicated, in his appearances on many panels, such as those of the Allied Social Science Association's meeting this weekend, Mike has shared his message with all who will listen. In the EPS panel I participated in yesterday, I mentioned a paper Mike co-authored with Linda Bilmes, who will speak shortly. The paper, written in 2011, discusses the use of drones, America's latest high-tech weapon of war, and warns about the consequences of this latest method of covert operations in which there is no declaration of war or congressional authorization or budgetary oversight. Just 2 days ago, a federal judge ruling in a case raising challenges to the secrecy of the drone program said that the case raised constitutional questions and about executive power and, quote, whether we are indeed a nation of laws, not of men. And the judge went on to say that there needs to be more public disclosure about the scope of the vast and seemingly ever-growing exercise resulting in great cost in lives and treasure. These are precisely the kinds of concerns that Mike raised about this particular weapon system and about others. We need, I should add, more people like Mike. He has been a role model for all of us, a shining example of an academic and an analyst with something to say about the most pressing matters of our time. I'll turn the program now over to our next speaker, who is Linda Bilmes.
Thank you. I'm Linda Bilmes, and for those of you who don't know me, I've been involved with EPS for a few years. One of my fields of study has been the costs of war, and a number of you are probably familiar with some of my papers, book chapters, and books with Joe Stiglitz, including the book, The $3 Trillion War, which is now out of date. It's at least 4, probably closer to 6 trillion. But I'm very pleased to be here tonight to say a few words about Mike. You know, one of the wonderful things about this organization is the opportunity to meet a wide range of interesting people. And even tonight at my table, the conversation has ranged from cooking to the streets of Calcutta to the collection of carpets in the basement of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. One of the great pleasures that I've had in this organization is the opportunity to meet Mike. There are many people who can talk about Mike as a mathematician. I'd like to speak about Mike as a person of great moral clarity and wisdom, qualities that I think are more rare in this world even than mathematical skill. Mike started talking about the problem of drones some years ago. I think now it's, it's pretty well known that there are some issues with drones, but drones are relatively new technology. In 2003, when we invaded Iraq, the United States had 60 drones. We now have more than 12,000. And Mike started, in the early days, questioning the wisdom of using drones. He and I collaborated on a paper a couple of years ago discussing the fact that while drones are superficially very attractive, very seductive, the fact that they are cheaper, that they could avoid putting our service members at risk, the fact that potentially we could use them to avoid protracted conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, made them very attractive and appealing at a superficial level kind of technology. But the emergence of this weapon has allowed us to dramatically expand the number of attacks that we carry out without any authorization, without any budgetary oversight, without any transparency. And I think Mike was the first one to point out that really, if you compare, for example, the US war in Bosnia, which was considered to be a war, we have far long ago surpassed in the amount of firepower that amount in terms of our drone attacks in Pakistan, and yet that is not acknowledged as a war. And he coined the name of our paper long before we wrote it in sending an email to me some years ago that said, Linda, how many wars is the U.S. fighting today? Mike has been focused on the moral, legal, ethical, security, and long-term utility questions of this technology, including questions such as, who makes the decisions about who to target? Is it effective? What is the legal basis for using drones? Are drones secure from hacking and interventions? And he concluded strongly that drones are the latest and are opening a new chapter in the arms race, and that it is only a matter of time before the Chinese, the Russians, and many others around the world develop their own drones, and this technology escalates. So I know if he were here and speaking to us today, he would argue passionately, as he has throughout his life, arguing that there should be much greater transparency on how this weaponry is used, and that we should be debating whether this militarization of our foreign policy is making us more secure. I am so sorry that Mike is not here tonight, but I am really pleased that we are able to honor him and his contribution and his role at EPS and to the world. Mike, we wish you a speedy recovery, and the world would be a better place if there were more people like you, and certainly the economics profession would be a better place if there were more economists like you. Thank you, Mike.
Our next speaker is Manas Chatterjee.
I'm Manas Chatterjee, State University of New York at Binghamton, and also Peking University in China. Michael Integrator is a family friend where you know him for more than 2 or about 3 decades. The first time I got in touch with him when I used his book on dynamic programming in my class in the Wharton School, and it was an excellent book. And he happened to be in Philadelphia, and I invited him to my class to discuss, without any mathematical language, the importance of dynamic programming in business management. That's excellent. Then the second thing is the question of one thing which mentioned before, is his knowledge in other areas. Maybe some of us do not know, in addition to healthcare economics, he was very interested in regional science, in regional planning. Although he did not do very much work in regional planning, but he had great ideas in the area of regional planning. And also in the case of healthcare, he did a lot of work in the United States, but he wanted me to encouraged me to do the same type of thing for Indian and for developing countries. He was a great person, not only for the developed countries, but also for developing countries. Also, I was associated with Michael and also Bob Swartz, in the beginning of the EPS with the E-card, which used to be before EPS. And I remember him, he was a very good strategist. I remember I and Bob Swartz and Michael Integrator in Tokyo airport, and maybe the late Bob Swartz, maybe you know him, he's a little bit, impatient to have a e-card section in China. And in that sense, you're a little bit aggressive. But Michael Integrator was very strategic. He discuss the matter with the Chinese peace scientist in such a way that there's no animosity. At that time, China was not as simple as, it's not simple now, but it's not as simple as before. And then the greatest contribution, in my judgment, for Michael Integrator is integration of peace science and economics of peace economics. In the beginning, there was a perception of some people interested in peace science that Michael Integrator was kind of a hawk, in particularly his articles on Michael Integrator and Brito on the nuclear proliferation. But later on, we found out that it is the American spirit. He loved this country, the security of this country, that was responsible for his article or Integrator and Brito, and not because he was a hawk. Later on in his later life, if you read his articles on human security and his interest in the developing countries, you will find out this is just the reverse. He was a great humanist. I traveled with Michael Integrator in many countries, particularly in India. He was confronted by the leftist journalist in New Delhi about this American role in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. And it was reported in the newspaper in such a way. He did an excellent job showing the American side. So many economists, they pushed him hard to the corner, many journalists, but his reply was so much accurate and strategic that everybody was very much pleased. He also was a great friend of mine in my personal matters. For example, he helped me very much to establish the Mahatma Gandhi Center of Conflict Prevention and Management in the University of Sydney, and also he in China, in Iraq, in Turkey, in Russia, and Indonesia, in Jakarta, and India many times. He have been there, and he was a great friend and a collaborator for my efforts in that direction. And then later on in the area in globalization, he has excellent articles written in my edited books in globalization, a different approach in globalization and security, how globalization is affecting security, what is the role of globalization on security. Excellent, new ideas. And then he worked on human security. And he was a very humorous person, if you do not know, a very wide, open heart. And then he also helped me to start the series of books with Elsevier on conflict management, peace, economics, and development. And it was very helpful for me to start that article, the book series, which have been published in 20 volumes. So I know him very well. He's my family friend, as you know. He knows about my children. I know about his children. And so it is a great privilege for me to say good things about him. I wish him good luck and good health for the future. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lucy Webster. Lucy is a longtime member of EPS, former director of our organization, currently a member of our board of directors.
I want to tell you a bit about Mike Intrigator's reputation at the UN, where I was the Disarmament Department's liaison person with non-governmental organizations working with the UN. And he has always been greatly admired by everyone who had ever run into him or heard about him in the field of disarmament. And whenever one would have any sort of event to which he could be invited, that would be a sure draw for lots and lots of people. So that was important, and his warm personality was always very helpful working with the different NGOs there, including, at that time, Economists for Peace and Security, or ECAR as it was called then. Mike is the person who I most closely associate with the concept and the saying that there's no such thing as national security. There's only human or global security. And this is a phrase, a differentiation, a distinction that needs to be examined. As I said at the bottom of the form I filled out to participate in the new organization that's been set up now called Economics of National Security. But I think that it's important that we engage with and interact with people who think of things that way, which is sort of out of date. And as I said on another occasion over this weekend, you know, now that we have atomic bombs, we can't just, as I've heard Jamie say, you can't just send a gunboat up the river and deal with the problem. You have to work it through. And now that we know that we've not succeeded in winning 3 wars in developing countries, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, I mean, it's very doubtful whether the contribution in any of these wars was of real value to that nation, and it's almost certainly not of value to the United States. So the concept that there's no national security without global security is very important, and it's Mike's slogan in my mind. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Kenneth Arrow.
I'm sure that Mike will be deeply appreciative of the compliments and recognition that have been bestowed on him this evening. They represent, of course, reality. I don't think there's any exaggeration of his role that he has played in this organization and throughout his academic life. I've been a friend of Mike's for quite a long time. We encountered each other somewhere in the 60s. He had worked, and some of his early work had been related to some of mine. We corresponded. Then, among his, in addition to his very busy scholarly life, he had undertaken to be an editor of of a very famous series of small volumes put out by the North Holland Publishing Company. I think it was called Contributions to Economic Analysis. In the course of this, he approached me with an idea for handbooks, for a series of handbooks, and that's been a basis of our collaboration and close relationship now for, I don't know, close to 50 years. In fact, to get the thing started, we ourselves edited the first handbook published. And as frequently happens, our enthusiasm got a little ahead of ourselves, and we wound up with 2 volumes where we had only planned on 1. But that was part of Mike's productivity. Everything became important, and yet quality, intensity, academic meaningfulness were always an important part, as has been stressed by a number of the speakers already. his deep moral concerns, as reflected most recently the drones, before that in the whole question of warfare in general, but especially of nuclear warfare, were always accompanied by analysis. It was not, oh, this is terrible, we got to get it. It was terrible, we got to get rid of it. But why, how much, what are the problems, what are the steps? All of these always were recognized. He was a trained and creative economic analyst. And I'm grateful that he will be hearing these speeches today and know and realize how much his contributions have meant to all of us. Bob Schwartz, as you all know, took the initiative in creating what was originally called economics, the Allied for Arms Reduction, and has become Economists for Peace and Security. And Lawrence Klein and I were the first chairs of this organization. But it was right from the beginning Mike who was the spark plug, whose vigor and energy, whose breadth of vision animated the organization and brought so many of others who are here and have made such great contributions, such as all the speakers today, into a living and, we hope, somewhat effective whole. In particular, of course, he was involved with relations with the Soviet Union, as it then was, and later the various successor states, particularly Russia. His contacts with Nikopolov, with Nemtsov, with others, were a vital part. And he communicated not only to our organization, but the country as a whole, the relations between political movements and democratization in Russia and the protection of the world from the horrors of nuclear warfare. And in particular, of course, we built up a very strong, as has already been pointed out, a very strong Russian connection and part of our organization. Of course, I can't help regretting, as we all do, I'm sure, that what seemed to be a tremendous opportunity for achieving nuclear disarmament at that moment, as explored, for example, by President Reagan and Prime Minister Gorbachev at Reykjavik, did not succeed, and many bad consequences which we're facing today have followed from that. The spread of nuclear, the proliferation, the fear that was always there of proliferation is increasingly being realized. I should say Mike has had, as has already been mentioned, a very rough year, medically speaking. He's had several severe illnesses, a ridiculous succession of things. I'm glad to say that he seems to have recovered from all his medical problems, but it has left him, as you can imagine, spending a year flat on your back in the need of great rehabilitation. He can't get up out of bed by himself and things of that kind. I'm sure at this stage, since the disease is the fundamental cause of the cure, this is a matter of time. But it may be a matter of a little while before we see again his presence among us and his invigoration of all that we have done, of all that he has done for us, and whether they will continue and come back to pushing us to do more for all of us and for the world. He has asked me, therefore, to acknowledge this honor on his behalf, and he sent the following message. Dear colleagues, it has been a wonderful experience being part of Economists for Peace and Security. I am very grateful to be honored and recognized at this year's annual dinner. Participating and seeing all of you at the annual meetings has always been a wonderful way to start the year. I'm very pleased to see the organization go from strength to strength and to see it grow to its current size. I'd like to thank you all for your professional dedication and contributions to the organization, and for your collegiality and friendship over the many years. It is a big personal disappointment that my present health condition, unfortunately, makes it impossible to actually be here with you today. I'm very sorry to have been out of touch over the past year. My health condition has made it too difficult to keep up with email contact and such. I hope that the coming year will be a happy and healthy year for each of us and each of you, and that 2013 will bring us closer to global peace and security. Warm regards and my sincere thanks, Mike. I want to thank all the speakers, and I'm sure that Mike will thank them all, for their contributions to the goal of achieving security from warfare and for their evaluations of him. Thank you.
This is not the first occasion on which EPS has held a dinner with an absentee guest. The first occasion actually was the first such dinner, which was held in Boston, and it was in honor of my father, who, although he was very close at hand at Cambridge, was unable to make the trip across the Charles River to come. So I think it's entirely fitting that we're holding this occasion in honor of Mike and Trilligator, who I really regard Mike as my brother, even though I first encountered him in the august and intimidating role as the author of a textbook when I was extremely young, and I imagined him to be very much older than in fact he is. In any event, well, I think the comments made so far and the exceptionally eloquent remarks made by Ken Arrow speak from all of our hearts, and we know that you know how much we esteem you. I want to just close the meeting, as I always do, by offering my exceptional thanks as the chair of EPS, person whose job is made easier every year by the extraordinary support and just competence and smooth operation of our leadership team. I'd want to acknowledge Richard Kaufman, my vice chair, members of the board, who include Lucy Webster and Linda Bilmes, and anyone else here who's aboard, Mike Lind, and those who are, and Alan Sinai, yes, so, but also those who are not present. Our trustees, and there are a number of them here. I know Bob Gordon is here, but I want to especially acknowledge our founder, Ken Arrow, whose support for this organization has been inestimable over the entire life of the organization. And let me acknowledge, as always, the person who really makes this organization run and who is just been a rock. I mean, it's someone who can make an event happen in the twinkling of an eye. I know it requires a great deal of work, but the extraordinary thing about the work that she does is that I don't have to observe it at close hand. So let me just ask everybody to give a hand to our director, Taya Harvey. Thank you very much, Taya, as always. And with that, thank you all for your support of this organization. I think you all appreciate just how significant the mission of this organization is and how useful in our small ways we have managed to be over quite a long period of time now, and I hope that we will continue to be well into the future. Thank you all.